keeping an eye out for anyone that joins in late. Of course, as you just heard, this session is going to be recorded, just for your heads up. And if you feel you need to take a break or step away, there will be a recording of this session available for you on our website. So welcome everyone and good morning. I'd like to welcome you to our early bird webinar for our upcoming grant round for this year. By the end of today, you're going to know everything that you need to know to successfully submit a really strong application to either our capital or non-capital grant round. So just looking in the audience, I see quite a few familiar faces and a few new folks as well. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Andrew Arvizu, and I'm the Assistant Administrator with the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. I'm also joined today by Jen Ruffner, if you'd like to say hi.
Yes, good morning. Hi, I'm Jen Ruffner, and I am the outgoing administrator of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. Welcome, everyone.
And I also see we have a handful of Heritage Area Directors on the call, including Elizabeth Chateau and Meg Bacco. If either of you would like to say hi.
Hey there, I recognize a couple of my gang out there, and I'm glad you're here, and I'll be looking forward to working with you.
All right, so with introductions out of the way, I'd like to go ahead and talk about our upcoming agenda for today. First things first that I'd like to talk about is point out a handful of the reference documents that we're going to be covering, where you can find more information if you have any questions. Once we've got that out of the way, I'd like to provide an introduction to the program. So I'm going to go over our management documents and give you just a brief introduction so you can get a sense of what we are all about. With that introduction out of the way, we'll go ahead and move into a deep dive into project grants, going over eligibility criteria, talking about the types of projects that get funded, and going over eligible expenses. With the nitty-gritty out of the way, we'll then turn our attention towards the actual application itself, as well as the award schedule, so you can get a sense of the timeline that you're going to be working with. We'll wrap up by talking about some tips and guidelines for completing a successful application based on feedback from previous years. And then at the very end of the presentation, you're welcome to stick around, especially if you're new to the program, as we're going to go over how to use our online portal. So that's what today looks like for us. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. Everything that we're going to be talking about here today is covered in our grants guideline. This document covers everything from how to submit an application to how exactly it's going to be reviewed. And this document is available to you on our website, and it was also sent out in your registration email, so you all should have a fresh copy of it. Now, if there's one thing you look at in the grant guideline, I would really suggest you take a look at the checklist in the appendix of the guideline. This will give you an itemized list of actionable items that you can go through to ensure you're on the right track to submit a successful application. But of course, if you have any questions, please refer to this document. It will give you everything that you need to know. That being said, if there is more that you'd like to dig into, there are a few additional reference documents you can turn to. First among them is the grants manual, which goes into even greater depth about the life cycle of MHAA grants. So if you really want to understand what's going to happen after you receive an award or how that process will work, that is where you can turn. In addition to the grants manual, we also have quite a few resources on our website, including a copy of these slides, as well as a recording of this webinar. You can find all of these resources on our website, or you can navigate to them by clicking on the link that we have below this slide here. So those are the big documents that you'll want to be looking out for. Now, let's go ahead and turn our attention to an overview of the Heritage Areas program. The first question we often are confronted with is, what are heritage areas in general? Well, heritage areas are locally designated, state-certified entities that represent concentrations of historical, cultural, and natural resources that serve both the local community and bring heritage tourists to the area. At the moment, there are 13 certified heritage areas touching all of the counties of Maryland. The goal of heritage areas is to support the economic well-being of Maryland's communities by celebrating the state's unique cultural, historical, and natural resources, and by creating partnerships between those protecting those resources and promoting, supporting, and creating place-based experiences that bring in heritage tourists to the area. So that begs the question, how exactly is heritage tourism defined? Well, the best way to look at it is that heritage tourism is when individuals travel to a specific site or location to experience an authentic place-based experience that they could not get anywhere else, to see an authentic representation of the local culture. Now, Maryland is rich with history and culture, dating all the way back to the 1630s and well before that. So what we are looking for when we're talking about heritage tourism is highlighting the resources that are unique to all of the regions of Maryland. And you can see here that heritage areas come in all shapes and sizes, and wherever you are in Maryland, you're never too far away from a heritage area. What's important to note is that as you are considering your project, you'll want to make sure that the work that you're performing for this project is taking place within one of Maryland's certified heritage areas. We'll go into that in a little more detail shortly. Now, if you'd like a more in-depth breakdown of what heritage areas are and what our goals are as a program, you can always refer to our strategic plan. Now, I'll be the first to note that this strategic plan is a little bit outdated at the moment. It was published in 2009 and covers the previous decade. However, all of the goals and initiatives that were outlined in the previous decade are still true today. And you can find a copy of this document online at our website or at the link below. Now, if I could just pull away the key takeaways from that document, there are really three big program goals that you'll want to be considering as you are crafting your application and thinking about what kind of project you would like to propose. These three goals are that you'll want to be looking for a way to develop a heritage tourism product, build partnerships within your community, and sustain regional identity. We've already talked about heritage tourism, but really the core of any good project is going to be developing some kind of heritage tourism product. That's what reviewers are going to be looking for, is the quality of the product being developed. But in addition to that, we really are looking for you to leverage the exceptional communities around these historical, cultural, and natural resources, whether that is making connections between various groups or building organizational capacity. These are things that really strengthen applications and can be a great way to ensure your project is successful. And finally, since heritage tourism relies so much on experiencing authentic place-based experiences, it is very important that your projects consider how they can work to sustain regional identity and really celebrate and protect the various features that make Maryland unique. So I'd like to go ahead and turn our attention over to MHAA itself as a body. Now, the acronym MHAA stands for the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, and that authority in question is our governing body. That is an independent entity within the Maryland Department of Planning that is staffed by the Maryland Historical Trust. And you can see that body consists of 19 members, both members of the public and representatives of state agencies, including the Department of Transportation, Education, and so on. And you can see a nice picture of them over there to the right back in 2018. Now, this independent department receives up to $6 million from DNR's program Open Space, and it is those funds that we use to give out as grants and to run the program. So that's where the money is coming from, and it's this 19-member body that will ultimately be approving the grants that you all are going to be applying for. So that's sort of the architecture of the program at the upper level, but many of you are probably much more familiar with your local management entity. And that's because at the local level, these heritage area management entities are really the folks that are doing the really critical work of organizing and mobilizing all of their various historical, cultural, and natural resources into one sort of concerted effort. These are the folks that are providing technical assistance, building organizational capacity, offering mini grants, and even helping out with reviewing program grant applications and ranking the project grants as they come in at the local level. So that is the local level, and there's one management entity for each of the 13 heritage areas. Then at the state level, for folks like myself, we are responsible for administering the project grants and providing the funding and support for the 13 heritage areas to be able to do their work and to offer mini grants. So that's the architecture of the program as it stands. And that's just a quick overview of what the program looks like, so you can get a sense of who we are and the kind of work that we do. I'd like to now turn our attention towards eligibility criteria, so you can make sure that your project is going to be eligible. And just as a special note, we are expecting a very high volume of applications this year, so we really do encourage you all to carefully consider before you submit your full application whether or not your program is going to be eligible for these project grants. Now, the first and most important criteria for eligibility is making sure that the work of your project is taking place in a heritage area. So one important note here is that your organization does not need to be within a heritage area, but the work that you are doing has to take place there. So let's say you wanted to do work in Baltimore. If you were outside, perhaps in Baltimore County, that's perfectly fine as long as the work that you're doing would be taking place in the Baltimore Heritage area. So the best way to check if you are within a heritage area is by going to the website featured above. There you're going to be able to find a really in-depth map that will tell you down to the parcel exactly where the borders of the heritage area are. If you ever need more help with this, we actually have an online tutorial with the link below that will walk you through step by step. But at the moment, I'll go ahead and take you through a cursory view of what you would want to do. So to start, you'd navigate to the website as mentioned before, and then click on the Layers tab that we have here circled in red. Under that Layers tab, you'd want to go ahead and check the Other MHT-based Data tab, and then turn on the Maryland Heritage Areas layer. And you can see here over at the right, we're looking at the Canal Place Heritage Area. In the pink, that is the heritage area itself, and everywhere that's not shaded is outside of the heritage area. And all you would need to do at this point is plug in the site where your project would be doing its work into that search bar at the top and see whether you fall in or out. Now, if it just so happens that you are outside of the heritage areas just slightly, that isn't need for panic, although it is need for quick action, because it is possible that you could have a boundary amendment issued to get your site into the heritage area. But if you think that's going to be necessary, we really want to encourage you to get on that as soon as possible. Like I mentioned, it is totally possible to have a boundary amendment done, but it is a process that you will need to work with your local heritage area on to ensure that it can happen before the beginning period of the grant. It's also possible that the heritage area you're working with may already be undertaking a boundary amendment, so you could fit in quite well to their existing plans. So again, if you're outside of the heritage areas, don't panic. simply talk to your local heritage area director. There are a few more eligibility criteria that I'd like to focus on here. In particular, the type of organization that can apply for our project grants. So we can only provide project grants to nonprofits and government entities. And these can be local jurisdictions, state agencies, and federal agencies. We cannot provide grants to private individuals or to businesses. So only nonprofits and government agencies. So those are the key eligibility criteria. Now let's step back and take a look at the schedule for these grants. The most important date that you're going to be looking at is January 28th of next year. And that is when the intent to apply forms are due at 11:59 that night. So these intent to apply forms are very simple one-page applications that just give us a sense of the type of project that you are planning. Everything that you put into this application can be subject to change, but the key here is that you cannot submit a full application if you do not submit an intent to apply. So even if you are just considering a full application and you're still on the fence, or you're not entirely sure your project is a good fit, it is still incredibly important that you submit an intent to apply regardless. So again, January 28th, you'll need to submit your intent to applies. A little later on, we're going to go over exactly how you'll do that, but you'll keep hearing me say it, January 28th, that is the most important deadline on this list at the moment. Now, after that, we're going to be looking at deadlines for full applications. And the first deadline for full applications is going to be February 25th, 2022 for multi-heritage area applications. If you're planning work in multiple heritage areas, that's the category you're going to fall into. Now, most projects that we receive are planning work in just one heritage area. And if you fall into that category, you'll want to refer to your specific heritage area for your deadline for the full application. You'll see on the next slide, we've got all of the deadlines spread out. But if you're ever in need of a reminder, I'm sure these deadlines are going to be posted all over your local heritage area's website. And certainly you're always welcome to reach out to your local heritage area to inquire about when that deadline will be. So after you've submitted that full application, there's a bit of a lull as we all go and review your applications. But you'll hear back from us in July, and July 14th in particular is when you'll find out whether or not you've received your grant. That's also the project start date, meaning that is the very earliest that work on your project could begin. Between September and January of the following year, or of the next year, that's when you're going to be receiving grant agreements, and upon executing those grant agreements, you'll be receiving your first payment. So really, as you're planning out the logistics of your project, you'll want to keep in mind that between November 2022 and March of 2023 is when you can expect to receive your first payment. And again, you won't be able to start work on the project provided you receive the grant until after July 14th, 2022. So all of these things are good to keep in mind as you're crafting your timeline for the application. As I mentioned earlier, here are all of the local deadlines set by the heritage areas themselves. And again, this is available on our website, in these slides, in the grant guidelines, and on the websites of your local heritage areas. So that's what the timeline looks like. Now let's go ahead and break down types of projects and really get into the nitty-gritty of what these projects look like. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of projects that we offer grants for. The first type is our capital grants, and the second is our non-capital grants. Our capital grants are our brick and mortar type grants. These are any kinds of projects that pertain to permanent construction or anything that's going to exist for longer than 15 years. They can include anything from restoring a historic property to pre-development for new construction, and they can even include outdoor resources such as pavilions or new trails. Now, typically, a lot of folks associate our capital projects with restoring historic buildings, but the property that you're working on does not need to be historic. You can actually be building a new site altogether. Perhaps you're making a new museum to promote heritage tourism, or producing a theater that's going to highlight local culture. Either way, those would fall directly into the kinds of capital projects that we undertake. And you can see a great example of the kind of work that gets done by these projects over here on the right in the Baltimore National Heritage Area. It's a beautiful restoration of a chapel. Now, capital projects can range anywhere from $5,000 to $100,000. And importantly, capital projects are going to be subject not just to compliance review, but also to easement review. So let me go a little more into detail on easements. So certain properties that are identified as being of a special historic importance may be required to convey an easement to the Maryland Historical Trust. And this easement is a contract between the property owner and the trust that gives the trust the authority to inspect the property and review any proposed changes to the property that might jeopardize the historic integrity of the property. So, give me one moment here. Apologies for that. So, the easements in question would only be applicable if your property is of special historic importance, and they are term easements, typically lasting 20 years. Though the term is dependent on the terms of the project that you're proposing, ranging anywhere from 15 years to however long would be needed to ensure the protection of the structure in question. Now, these terms do reset when you apply for new funding from the trust if the easement committee determines that they want to continue this easement. And if you have any questions or suspect that your property may require an easement because it is of special historic importance, go ahead and reach out to me and I can put you in contact with our easement team and they can talk to you about any questions you may have. And just as one final note, the specific criteria on easements is that if the property is on or eligible for the Maryland Register. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and move on. To our second type of grant, which is our non-capital project grants. These grants range from $5,000 to $50,000 and include any kind of work that is not a brick and mortar project. Now, typically, these look like anything from planning and interpretation to new exhibits or perhaps web design or even research. Though one key consideration is that if you are looking at doing some kind of research or publishing or web design, we're still going to be wanting to look for a finished heritage tourism product that's going to bring heritage tourists to the heritage area. So while pure research may not be eligible, research that will supplement an existing site or work towards a finished product could be eligible. You can see a great example of a non-capital project over here at the right, coming from the heart of Chesapeake Country heritage area. Now, between these two types of project grants, there are a handful of expenditures that are going to be ineligible. The first of which is overhead fees for the applicant organization. Now, there is one stipulation here, and that is if you are a nonprofit applying for a non-capital grant. If you fall into this specific category, you can include 10% of your budget as indirect costs, but everyone else cannot use any overhead fees as part of their project. Additionally, you cannot use staff salaries as expenditures from your grant funds, though consultant fees are eligible, and you'll be able to use staff salaries as matching funds, which we'll discuss shortly. The same can be said of marketing. While you cannot use it as expenditure from your grant, you are welcome to use it as match. So speaking of match, let's go ahead and go over these requirements as part of your project grants. Whether you're applying for a capital or non-capital grant, all MHAA grants require a 100% match, meaning for every dollar that you spend, you'll be required to provide $1 of your own. However, these dollars can be provided either as cash or in kind, and it can be any combination of cash and in kind. And when I say in kind, I mean anything from volunteer time to donated professional services or donated items. So really be creative, especially if you're a smaller organization. We encourage you to seriously consider taking advantage of in-kind matching funds to ensure that you'll be able to meet this one-to-one match requirement. Now, we recognize that many of the programs and projects that these grants will be funding may cost significantly more than the sum of your project and one-to-one match. Especially if you're doing a capital project, it may be a total cost of millions of dollars if you're doing new construction or really intense restoration. We do a request that you track exactly how much the full cost of the project will be, even beyond just this grant and match. And we ask that you include this information in the Other Project Costs tab of your application. That way we'll be able to get a more accurate picture of how much money is being leveraged with these state funds. And one more note on match is that you're not allowed to use other sources of state funds with the exception of staff time from state employees. However, other funds from either private organizations or from federal grants are acceptable. So just a few more examples of the types of match that you could take advantage of. Of course, you could take advantage of cash expenditures as cash match. We definitely encourage you to look at using things like staff time, volunteer time, and any donated or discounted professional services and materials. And as you can see underneath the volunteer time, we do have a set rate that we use. This rate is likely to change by the time that you receive your grant, but if you ever want to check what the rate is, you can go to the link that we provided below and search for the state of Maryland. At the moment, the rate is $31.29, but as I said, that is likely to change when we enter into the next fiscal year. So if we take a look at the total project that you would be applying for, it's just important to note that the very minimum that you'd be looking at is a $10,000 project consisting of $5,000 grant and $5,000 from the match requirements. So that's the scale of the projects that you'd be looking for. And if it happens you're looking for something smaller, we strongly encourage you to take a look at your local heritage area's mini grants programs, which may be available. That might be a resource for smaller projects. There's a few more little pieces of criteria that I'd like to talk about before we move on to general grant writing tips for this application. One of the most important things you'll want to consider as you're applying is how your project is going to align with the goals of the heritage area where the work will take place. For your project to be eligible, it has to align with the goals of your local heritage area. And if you'd like to see those goals, we have all of your heritage areas management plans available online at our website. And we also have access to 5-year plans and annual plans, so you can get an up-to-date sense of what new and present initiatives are for the local heritage areas. Of course, another great way to get a sense of your local heritage area's goals is to simply speak to local heritage area staff. All of our heritage area directors are excellent folks, and they will be more than happy to help explain what the heritage areas are doing and what they are all about. Maryland is a really diverse state, and all 13 of our heritage areas have unique and exciting initiatives that are ongoing and that really help them stand out and separate them from the crowd. So I'm sure they'd be more than happy to talk with you about how you can align your project with one or more of their goals. And really, that's the key here, is ensuring that the work that you're going to be doing aligns in some way with a piece of the heritage area's planning documents. We often receive applications from folks who really aren't sure how their project is going to align with these goals, and this tends to hurt applications and can potentially make them ineligible. So we really want you to consider how your project can align with these goals and fit the various themes and initiatives of your local heritage area. All right, so the next thing that I'd like to briefly do here is talk about the review process itself. So after you have submitted your full application as per the deadline for your local heritage area, it's entirely possible that you may not hear back from us for a little bit unless we have questions to ask about your application. And like I said, that's because folks will be reviewing your applications. And this review process actually starts at the local level. Each heritage area has a committee of experienced individuals who will be reviewing and ranking all of the grants that come into that heritage area. And by the end of that review process, each heritage area will produce a list, a ranked list of all of the grants coming from their area. Now, this ranked list will then be sent to the state level, and at the same time, the state review panel will be reviewing all 200 or so applications across all of the heritage areas. Now, this review panel is a body of roughly 30 individuals with a wide variety of professional and personal experience. These individuals will have all 200 or so grants divvied up among them so that each grant is being read by 3 or 4 folks. And after reading and scoring all 200 or so grants, we'll then end up with a list from each heritage area and a list from the state. These two ranked lists will then be placed into an algorithm that will weight an average in favor of the local review. And the final average that is produced will then create a list that we use to discuss what grants should be funded. Ultimately, the grant review panel will submit recommendations on which grants should be funded to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, and on that July 14th meeting, the authority will vote on whether or not to approve the list submitted by the grants review panel. So that is the whole process that you'll be working with. And during that time, it's quite likely that unless we have any questions for you, you can expect a little bit of silence from us on that part. Now, if you'd like an even more detailed breakdown of that, or if you'd like to see the actual score sheets and criteria that we'll be using to rank your grants, you can see that in our grant guidelines on pages 13 to 14. And I certainly recommend you take a look at that so you can get a sense on exactly how all of the points in our application are going to be ranked. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of different criteria that you'll be looking at. You can see the list of these criteria all across the screen here. And if you want to check on the grant guidelines, you can see it there as well. But we certainly recommend, again, that you refer to the sample score sheet for details. And these categories here just give you a sense of the type of things you'll want to be considering as you prepare to submit your application. All right, so now it's time to provide some grant writing tips based off of our experience with the past grant rounds, as well as some direct feedback from folks on the grants review panel. So starting with our feedback, the 3 real takeaways that we have from you at the state level is to take a look at the grant guidelines before beginning your application, just to make sure that you're going to be eligible and understand what we are going to be reviewing you on, so that you don't do any unnecessary work, since the full application is a fair deal of work to begin with. To that end, we also strongly recommend to not wait until the last minute to apply for these grants. I've actually been on the other side of these grants in my previous position. I've been applying for them, and I understand that these grants can take quite a deal of time to put together, especially when you've got to get together things like estimates for a budget. So really, the sooner you can get started on these applications, the better. And finally, the last big tip we have is ask questions if you aren't sure. And that can either be by referring to guidance documents, reaching out to your local heritage area, or coming to us at a state level. So more general tips for you to consider even before you start working on this application. We have a handful of questions that you may want to sit down and answer among the folks that will be working on this application. But really the keys that I'd like to pull out here is understanding exactly what the finished product is going to be and exactly why it will be beneficial both for your organization and for the heritage area as a whole. Some more tips here. We really encourage you to have a clear and detailed budget and description of the product. This budget and description are often the key items that make or break an application, as our grants review panel tends to really focus in on the description of the product, how it's going to be used, how it'll impact the heritage area, and how the funds are going to be spent. We also encourage you to have someone that's unfamiliar with the project read your application. And the reason we say that is because, as I mentioned earlier, the grants review panel comes from a really diverse background. We've got folks that are really into the heritage tourism community, but we've got lots of folks who are outside of it providing a fresh perspective. So having folks that are unfamiliar with your project review your application will ensure that you'll be able to speak not just to experts in heritage tourism or history perhaps, but also experts in other fields such as economic development or environmental studies, things of that nature as well. We also encourage you to give a unique descriptive name that's different from previous grants. This will be helpful when folks are discussing your project. We also encourage you to provide as much detail as is requested. Certainly, if we feel the need to request more detail, we'll reach out to you. But again, we are expecting a very busy grant round this year. So including the detail that you can in your application first is always very helpful to us, rather than us having to reach out to you to request more detail. And finally, it is always beneficial to make sure that the match that you're talking about is either already in hand, or you have a good sense of when it will be in hand or what you're going to use as match. Again, we do encourage you to use any combination of cash and in-kind, but making sure that you are clear on where that matching fund is going to come from really helps give the grants review panel confidence that you'll have the organizational capacity to complete your project. And then really one key item that I want to stress here is that applications that are the strongest are often the ones that have a clear consistency between their project description timetable, and budget. And you can see we've gone ahead and bolded exactly where the various items in the project description fit into both the timetable and budget. So the description calls for an exhibit, a brochure, fabrication, and design. The timetable tells you exactly when those items are going to happen, and the budget tells you exactly how much those items are going to cost. So that kind of parity between all three of those items really works quite well in showing organizational capacity and clarifying the nature of your application. And then some more small tips. Visuals, especially photos and maps, are always very helpful for the grants panel, especially if you're talking about restoring a historic property. A picture of the damage is often able to really convey the necessity and urgency on repairing a property, but any kind of project can really do quite well with pictures. Though to that end, it is really, really important that you submit your pictures either in a Word document or as a PDF. And this is just because of a back-end issue that we have with our grant software that does not allow us to process any kind of raw image file, so a PNG or anything like that. So if you want your pictures to show up for the grants review panel, they do need to be in the Word or PDF format. We also encourage you to be very clear about your plans for maintenance of a project. In the past, we've had applicants talk about projects with these really huge ideas, but with no clear way to continue funding them, perhaps, opening new museums or things of that nature when there's no plans for how they're going to pay their staff. So anything that's going to need maintenance, we want to hear about how you are going to be able to continue to support this project moving forward. And finally, with this last tip here, we do encourage you to carefully read the online forms and follow their directions as posted. And of course, save and back up your work often. We have a very clunky system that we are always trying to improve, but we want to make sure that you don't lose any work. And of course, I'm going to touch more on that in a little bit when I actually walk through how to use that system. Okay, so that's advice from the state level. We also have a whole bunch of bullet points on advice from reviewers that you are welcome to take a look at, but I will go ahead and pull out some of the most important ones here. Again, the key is to clearly define a heritage tourism product so that the reviewers know exactly what this application is for and exactly what impact this project is going to have on the heritage area. Reviewers also really like to hear about how your projects are going to impact the local community and how it's going to bring heritage tourists in. That is really one of the keys. They also recommend that in your project description, you make a strong elevator pitch so that folks can quickly understand what your project is. Because if you'll remember in the layout of the grants panel, only 4 folks are really going to do a deep read. The remaining 20 or so are only going to hear a little bit about your project to be able to make a decision on it. So having that strong elevator pitch can really bring up your application. And again, you want to make sure that your application is readable to folks from a wide variety of backgrounds. They also really ask that folks answer the questions on the application rather than just providing the information that they think reviewers want to hear. If your project is going to be planning or documentation, the review panel requests that you focus in on how this research or documentation is going to create a finished heritage tourism product. And they also request that you look at how your project will create partnerships and how your deliverables are going to be accessible for people with disabilities as well. So these are all just a handful of the advice that we've received from past reviewers. So a few more pieces of information before we wrap up this portion of the webinar. If your project is going to be taking place on DNR land, you do need to request, obtain approval from the Department of Natural Resources prior to your application being submitted. And we recommend allowing a 30 to 45 day turnaround for DNR review. You can see the form for this request on the guidelines pages 25 to 26, and you'll be submitting those requests to the email printed below. So then, this has been a lot of information about the program, about the grants, and about tips on how to make it successful. So I'm sure you have a lot floating around in your mind right now. So just to clarify what you'll want to be looking at in the short term. Again, the most important date that you're looking at is the intent to apply deadline on January 28th, 2022. You can find out more information about the program and get started on your application by clicking the link highlighted above. That should be the first thing for you to prioritize. Then you'll want to make sure you take a look at the grant guidelines and start working with the checklist that's in the appendix. That will give you item by item things to take a look at to ensure that you're on the right track. We also encourage you to reach out to your local heritage area directors or your local heritage area staff so that you can start to understand how your project can fit into their goals and ongoing initiatives. If you're planning on requesting letters of support from your legislators and partners, we encourage you to do so by June 1st, but the sooner, of course, is going to be the better. If you need it, we encourage you to reach out and get a property owner letter as soon as possible. And if you're going to be doing work on DNR land, as I mentioned, or working with the school system, you'll need to be requesting those letters as soon as possible as well. And finally, once all of those things are taken care of, we recommend that the first place you look is going to be starting to build your budget, especially if you're going to need to request estimates for specific line items. So that's the overall lineup of what you'll want to be looking at in the short term. But again, the most important date here is that intent to apply deadline on January 28th. Whether you are sure you're going to submit a final application or not, we really strongly encourage you to submit that intent to apply because that's what lets you submit a final application. And to do that, you'll go to the link that was shown above and then click on the blue hyperlink that you can see on the screen circled in red. And that will, after you've logged in, take you to this page here where you can submit your ITA. And as you can see, very short form with just a few questions about what kind of project you'll be doing, how it will benefit the heritage area, and how much you're requesting. And once again, all of these things are subject to change. You're welcome to completely re-envision your project or put forward a totally new project, but you cannot apply for a full application if you do not submit an ITA. So again, that is January 28th, 2022. And of course, we do recommend that you print a copy of this ITA for your records so that you'll have it on you, but again, it can change as needed. And if you decide that you need to take a break on your ITA and fill it out later, you can actually click the Save and Finish Later button here. And if you need to get back into it, you'll just want to go to your grant account by going to the MHT website and log back in there. You'll be able to see it as in process. So after submitting that ITA, you will receive feedback from your local heritage area. It will then be up to you to submit a full application before your heritage area's deadline. And as I said earlier, it's possible that you won't hear back from us after submitting that full application until July 14th, 2022. Though, if we do have questions for you, we may reach out to you during that period of the grant review to clarify parts of your application. So certainly keep an eye out for that communication. Now, if there are specific questions that you would like to ask about your specific project, or if you just want the opportunity to talk with us at the state level to get a better sense of how our organization works, or answer really any questions that you have, over the next month or so, we're going to be offering 3 virtual Q&A sessions where you can sign up and join us to ask any questions that you may have and have a one-on-one talk about your project. The information for joining was in the registration link, and it can also be found at the link provided here. So we've reached the end of sort of the first section of our presentation here today. This is all of the information about the application, about the grant writing tips. What we're going to do next is look at how to apply. And this is really for folks who have not used our online system before. But I recognize many of you have used our system before. You feel comfortable with it. And if that is the case, I'd like to thank you for joining us here today. And you are more than welcome to head off. But before I move on, I want to open the floor to any questions about the material that we've covered earlier. I know it's quite a lot, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, what can I do for you?
So, Andrew, this is Liz from the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, and I just wanted to I just wanted to mention anybody from our heritage area, a project happening in Carroll, Frederick, or Washington County. We have an additional rubric that we're going to use for scoring the criteria that concerns consistency with our plans. And we will be giving that to you as you contact us when you are submitting your intent to apply. So just be aware that it's out there, and it's really intended to help you all achieve the best score possible for that particular part of the score sheet. That's going to be used by our local reviewers. So I just wanted to mention that, and thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions from folks before we move on to how to use the online system? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. This section is fairly short, but it's just to give you an introduction to our grants portal. So, as I mentioned before, the first interaction that you'll have with our online grants portal is going to be when you submit your intent to apply. And I briefly covered what that's going to look like. But again, you'll go to the website that I mentioned before, click on the button to start a new application. And upon doing so, you are going to be asked to create an online account if you haven't submitted an application before. Now, it's important to note that we do ask that each organization only create a single account. And this is because we can only associate each project with a single email address. So that email address should probably be your grants manager if you're an organization, rather than your executive director, perhaps. It should be someone who's going to be doing the majority of reporting and work with the actual application and with managing the grant once it's provided. So to create a new application, to create a new online account, you'll click the link at the bottom of the sign-in sheet here, highlighted in red. And this is going to take you to our new online account page, where you'll be asked to provide an email and a password. So once you've been provided with that email and password, you'll receive an email that will let you log in, and then you'll want to punch in your credentials right down here with that new email and password. And upon doing so, you will be taken to the application. Now, this is a full application, but the ITAs look quite similar. And you can see here for any of the applications that you'll be using, along the top are the various sections. You can think of these like pages if this was printed out. And then down in the center here, you can see all of the questions and fields that you're going to be filling in. So here are just a few general tips for the online system. All the fields that have asterisks are required for you to fill in. There is a spell check function with a check mark. We have actually removed most word limits from our application, But if there are word limits for specific fields, they will be on the, they'll be listed next to the text box that you'll be typing in. You are welcome to move from page to page as needed, and your progress will be saved, but only when you hit the save and finish later can you actually close the application window. So you can go from page to page without losing any progress, but if you exit out of the website before hitting finish and save, you do risk losing that progress. I'll go ahead and show the save and finish later button in just a moment. And if you are worried about using this online form, we do definitely recommend that you can either type up your answers in a Word document, or you can even print out the application and write it out if that's what you're most comfortable with, and then punch in the answers later on. So you can see here what I was saying with the asterisks. This marks a required form. And again, just a close-up on the various pages that you'll be working on. You're welcome to navigate between them without losing any of your work. And also the save and finish later button is both at the top and bottom of each page. I mentioned printing before. In the top right-hand corner, you'll find a printer-friendly version that you could print out and write on. And if you ever want to have an emailed copy sent to yourself of your answers and the questions, you can click the email draft button. Both of these are in the top right-hand side of the page. Now, if you ever get to a question that you need more information about, you can click on the little information box next to the question, and it will provide you with a little more of an in-depth description of what's being asked. Also, as before, that save and finish later button is at the bottom of the page if you ever want to close out of this tab. Now, on the topic of saving, this system does come with the issue that it tends to time out on folks. So after 45 minutes of being on the same page, you'll be prompted with this little pop-up here. You'll want to make sure that you hit continue to ensure you don't lose your work. And one of the most important things here is that even if you're just typing, that still counts as inactivity in the system. So it's really only looking for changing between pages, which is why we definitely recommend, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable with the system, that you type out your responses in a Word document or write them out however you're comfortable, and then put them into the system later on. And of course, we recommend that you save frequently as you feel comfortable with. Now, if you ever want to get back to an application that you've started, you'll want to click on this maroon My Grants account and log in with the credentials that you've provided. What you don't want to do is start a new application by clicking on the same link that you did beforehand, because that will actually start a new application and make it harder for you to get back into the content that you've already written. So submitting your intent to apply is fairly straightforward. You'll just be hitting the review and then the submit button at the bottom of the screen. You are encouraged to print a copy for your record. And as I mentioned before, a printer-friendly version of the link can be found in the upper right corner of the screen. So again, you'll want to click submit, but you won't be able to do that unless you have reviewed your answers. So it is a two-step process, and you'll want to make sure that you don't navigate away from the page until you have clicked that submit button. And upon doing so, you will receive an email confirmation saying that the ITA has been received and letting you know that everything is good. So as I mentioned before, the full application is your next step after the ITA, and that's going to be released to the same email and account that you submitted your ITA on. Again, we do recommend that you meet with your Heritage Area staff before you begin your full application. They'll be able to likely give you feedback on the ITA that you submitted. So you'll see the application show up once you log into the MHT grant portal. This will be the screen that you'll see. And in the top here is where the application will show up. If you've already started the application and then clicked the Save and Finish Later button, the application will actually move from this new area into your In Progress form. And to find that, you'll just want to click on the drop-down menu here and change it from New Applications to In Progress Applications. Another challenge that some folks run into is with uploading documents. It can be a little bit finicky. The way you'll want to do this is first clicking on the Browse button over here. Let's say you want to add a letter of support. So click the Browse button. That will bring up your file folder, and you'll want to locate the document that you want to upload on your computer. You'll then want to either double-click that document or click the document once and click the Open button. Now that gets the document address here, but to get it uploaded, you then need to click the Upload button down at the bottom. And in the Attachments tab, you are also asked to title your uploads with a descriptive title that will help folks understand what the file that you've uploaded is going to be. So you can see that here, where once you've uploaded something, it will show up in this tab right here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, once you've completed the application, you're going to be prompted to review it before you submit it. And that's going to check to make sure that all of the required fields are full. And we encourage you to also just make sure yourself that you've uploaded all of the required documents. If you've missed anything, the system will do its best to identify what's missing by giving you a message that looks like this, and that's fine. You can just go ahead and fill in whatever is missing there. And then once you hit review and don't get any error message, that means that everything has been filled in that needs to be filled. So you'll be able to submit. Now, we have had a few folks just hit the review button and then navigate away. That does not send the application to us. It actually just sort of leaves the application in a purgatory-like state. So you'll want to make sure that you hit that submit button and get it sent to us. But of course, that submit button doesn't show up until you've hit the review my application button. And that's just going to be down at the bottom of your application. And of course, we do ask that you fill in as many fields as are pertinent to your grant, even if it doesn't have that red asterisk in. In this case, more detail really will help your application stand out and help it in a particularly competitive year. But keep in mind that once you submit your application, you cannot make any changes to it. So really make sure that before you submit, you're happy with all of your answers, unless there is something really, really serious that needs to be changed, in which case we can release the application back out to you. But we do really ask that once you've submitted it, you keep it as is to be reviewed. So that is a summary of how you would use the grants portal. Does anyone have any questions on how to use that portal itself? Yes, what can I do for you? And I believe you're muted at the moment.
Hi, this is Eleanor Thompson.
Oh,
I have
okay.
one question with the grant. Let's say if someone is working on a project and they need stabilization for, say, a roof. It's been a bad winter. Say they did receive the award letter, official award letter, and say the roof collapsed from damage through the storms and snow or whatever. Is there any emergency funding that can be used from the grant if they applied for it?
In this scenario, if they've already received the grant and then the project goes awry because the roof collapses, we would be able to issue an amendment to change the scope of work of the grant to meet the needs of the applicant. So if we would want to change the scope to then deal with finding a way to replace the roof, yeah, that would be perfectly acceptable. Since they've already received this grant, we probably wouldn't want to go in for emergency funds as well. Although on occasion we do have emergency grant funding available. I do believe at the moment we have exhausted all of those funds. But yes, you would be able to, in this scenario, change the scope of work of the grant they had already received to meet the needs of the project.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions for today? Well, hearing none, I will go ahead and thank you all for joining us today. It was a pleasure to speak to you all, and I'm looking forward to seeing what great projects are going to come through. This is always the most exciting time of year, just getting to see all of the great work that's being done by folks across the state. Of course, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to your local heritage area. Either I or our heritage areas are going to be really excited to help you as you move forward with these applications. So thanks a lot for coming, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.